Today I learned best of the week number 3. Mark Hamill visited a dying fan in the hospital and answered every question as Luke Skywalker because the fan couldn't tell reality from fiction anymore. The boy's short-term memory was at times fleeting. The actor handled it like a pro, Solomon and Sikora remember. Mark spoke to John simply and directly and with utter dignity, Solomon says. John would ask the same question 3 times in a row, and Mark would answer the same way every single time. Mark was very kind, no rush, my time is your time. My heart. If you want more Mark Hamill goodness, I recommend the podcast Talk in Tunes with Robert Paulson with Mark Hamill as a guest, edit, episode 39. Makes 90 minutes fly right by hearing Mark talk about stuff he loves. The death of Sherlock Holmes almost destroyed the magazine that had originally published the stories. When Arthur Conan Doyle killed him off in 1893, 20,000 people cancelled their subscriptions. The magazine barely survived. Its staff referred to Holmes' death as the dreadful event. Just add to the narrative that Doyle hated Holmes, and even in his attempt to murder his own creation it bit him in the ass. Doyle was a spiritualist and had a massive falling out with Houdini over their opposing views. So it doesn't surprise me that he'd come to hate Holmes. Oh, for sure, he's on record as saying Holmes would be a person he would hate to know in person. Love that him killing Holmes would have caused him grief. William Still, the father of the Underground Railroad, interviewed and kept records of every escaped slave he came across. Once, while interviewing a man, he discovered that the man was actually his long-lost brother. He was a brave man, and that is a very tragic story. I can't imagine both the joy in meeting and yet the sadness that it took so long when he finally met his brother. It must have been emotional for both brothers. They wouldn't have had any way to communicate, so it must have at least been a relief to find out that the other had survived. Thomas Paine, one of America's founding fathers, was extremely progressive for his time. He advocated for the separation of church and state, universal suffrage, the abolition of slavery, and an early kind of socialism. When he died, only 6 men came to his funeral. He also survived execution in French prison because when the prison guards marked his cell door with a red X, it was open, but when a different set of guards came the next day to pick up the prisoners marked for execution, the door was closed, so they saw no red X and passed by. By the time the next set of executions was held, he had gotten a pardon. How was the door positioned for that to happen? The door swings outside of the cell, not inside. When the door is opened all the way, it's flat against the outside wall. When they marked the X on the door, it was opened and against the wall, so when they shut the door the X was facing inside of the cell. The guards that came the next day couldn't see the X, so they didn't get him. Bees will not build in a gap that is very specifically 6 to 9 millimeters in width, but they will build in larger or smaller spaces. This discovery, called bee space, made modern beehives with removable frames for honeycomb possible, otherwise, the bees would just cement everything together. But why do bees do this? I googled bee space and the following came up. The bee space is simply the crawl space that bees need to pass easily between 2 structures. 3/8 inch is the ideal space. When the space between 2 surfaces in the hive is the right size, bee space, the bees will respect the space and leave it free as their passageway. Usually we leave hallways between rooms, so I would think it's the same thing. Size could just be based on width of bees and they read up on it in their bee contractor books. I think you mean the bee contractor instructors teach the other bees with interpretive dance. A killer whale at Marineland learned to regurgitate fish and let it sit on the surface to attract seagulls. When a seagull takes the bait, the whale would come up from the water and eat the bird. 4 other whales copied that behavior. Killer whales are extremely intelligent. This is awesome. That is what is so frightening about them. Great white sharks are finely honed killing machines, but they go more on instinct than intelligence. Orcas are like great whites, but with brain power greater than most other species in the animal kingdom, save maybe 1 or 2. Are you aware that orcas literally hunt great whites? And mostly for sport too. After they kill them they eat only their liver, because they find it delicious, and leave the rest of the body to decompose and be eaten by other fish. Their intelligence really comes to bear when you know how they kill white sharks too. They swim up next to it, pressuring it, and then another orca swims just above it. The water pressure flips the shark upside down. When a great white shark is upside down it becomes catatonic, its brain shuts down, so it doesn't move. Then the orcas move in, and stop the motion the shark was in so that it lies still in the water. The gills of sharks need to have water moving through them for them to breathe, so when the orcas make it lie still in the water, it asphyxiates. This means that orcas, 1. Know that sharks becomes catatonic if you turn sharks upside down. 2. Know that sharks needs to have water move through their gills or they asphyxiate/drown. 3. They know exactly where the liver of sharks are, and that it is very nutritious. Edit, just going to be more precise after receiving several comments about this. Hopefully if I write it here I don't have to make more responses down below. They of course don't know this on a human level, at least I hope. They don't have a scholarly understanding of shark biology. They know that it happens, they become unresponsive, they die if they don't move, they don't know exactly why. Until 1987, there was no TV broadcast in Iceland on Thursdays. The idea behind the decision was to reserve Thursdays as a day for socializing. As a result, many Icelanders born before 1987 joke that they were most likely conceived on a Thursday. About 10 years ago we had a hurricane come through our city and knock out the power for an extended period. Most folks went outside to clean up the debris the next day and ended up socializing. My neighbors mentioned they had a bunch of meat defrosting. I mentioned I just finished brewing a batch of homebrew beer, 5 gallons worth. We ended up having a block party. Right towards the end of the night, the power came back on. Everyone went home. I've never talked to any of them since. When The Empire Strikes Back debuted in 1980, some showings were preceded by the short film Black Angel, which was directed by Star Wars art director Roger Christian. The film was thought lost for decades but has since been recovered and is available on YouTube. Wow! My brother and I went to the cinema in Cheltenham to see Empire Strikes Back when it came out, as a double bill with the first one, and I am 99% certain we saw this too. I was 7. We've talked about the Weird Nights film that was on first many times over the years, and this appears to be it. A family mystery put to bed after all these years. Amazing. Leah Betts, a girl that made headlines after dying from taking a single ecstasy pill, didn't actually die directly from taking the drug, but instead from drinking 7 liters of water in 90 minutes. Ecstasy causes water retention, making even slightly high water consumption fatal. I remember her dad Paul coming to our school to talk to us about the dangers of drugs. He was incredibly knowledgeable and spoke to us like adults. I think we were in year 8, so maybe 12-13. It was such a strange talk. He was so funny and engaging, but it was also heartbreaking as it wasn't long after Leah died. What a horrible situation for all involved. He used her legacy in a powerful and meaningful way. A black cemetery in Florida disappeared 100 years ago. The local newspaper started looking for it and through old documents learned that maybe a public housing complex had been built over it. An archaeologist used ground-penetrating radar to see what was in the ground. He found 120 coffins.